completely, let me tell you, it's always been safe to vote no. You know, I think the important thing that we know in this room, and the growing number of Americans are realizing, that the worst thing we can do is remain silent. How many times I've been to the campuses, I brought this subject up about military arrests and the problems that we're facing, assassination and torture and all these things. And I said, but how many times have you read it or heard about it on the evening news? I mean, it's almost like there's a silence out there. But early on in the campaign, I would bring up, I'd just sort of say, well, let me tell you a little bit about NDAA, and I would think I had to fully explain it. But as soon as I said NDAA, the people in the audience, they were outraged about it, which means we're not silent. We know about it, but we have to get around the system, which will not report on it because they're part of the problem. They're part of the military-industrial complex. But another accusation that is made quite frequently at me and you is that we're not patriotic. Well, we do know the military supports this because they said that's un-American, you're not patriotic. But all our views are supposed to be unpatriotic. They hide behind this and patriotism is. But I have been taught and I have been convinced that patriotism is that quality that permits us in a free society to criticize our own government when they're wrong. This is why I have a soft spot in my heart for whistleblowers. The whistleblower serves a very good function, but quite frequently, what are they accused of? Treason. Why are they doing this? Why are they releasing this information? So, Bradley Manning, you know. Now, he's in the military, and there are probably some, debate on exactly how and what to do, but let me tell you, Bradley Manning didn't kill anybody. Bradley Manning hasn't caused the death of anybody. And what he has exposed, he is equivalent to Daniel Ellsberg, who told us the truth about Vietnam. And when Daniel Ellsberg was under the gun, the government wanted to crack down on the exposure on the New York Times. The New York Times, printed the material that Ellsberg released. And that went to the Supreme Court. And Ellsberg did not go to prison. It was upheld, and New York Times did not suffer either the consequence of this. So we're at this point, but just think right now, I'm afraid that if we took a poll across the country and they say, should we try Assange for treason? But most Americans are going to say, oh yes, he's a bad guy. He's telling us all these secrets. But guess what? He's an Australian citizen. And you read about it all the time. That's try him for treason and bring him to the United States. So we have so much power and clout, even Sweden is submitting to saying, well, if he gets here, we'll drum up some false charges and we'll send him over to the United States so he can have a fair trial. But those are the kind of things, those are the problems that we need to worry about, that we need to be concerned about, but they're also the kind of things that we can reverse, and that should be our goal, to change this, to know what a free society is all about, to know where we are and what we need to do. We don't have to invent it. We've had a good taste of it. We don't have to go back to a static period in the 19th century because there were a lot of problems. Even the gold standard can be improved upon. So we want to advance the cause. I think the cause of individual liberty actually started in 1215 and got a tremendous boost with our revolution and our Constitution. But we don't want to say we're going back. The people who want tyranny, want big government, that's what is ancient, and that is what we should worry about. They're the ones who want to go back to the Dark Ages. So, how do we look at today, 2012? Do we look at it like 1913? Are we starting all over again and bringing in a new system? Is it 1917 with the Sovietization and the communization of the world? Is it the 1930s where we had so much fascism and Keynesianism and all the mess we have, and then the 50s and the advancement, or now are we going to have to live with the neocons? Or are we going to say, we're living in a new era, we're going to start something different, completely different than all that? In 1935, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel, It Can't Happen Here. And that novel essentially was a warning because he believed it could happen here. It was an anti-fascist novel because he was very concerned about Mussolini and the Nazis. And his whole argument was that it can't happen here. But I would like to turn that around and say, it can happen here. What can happen here, though, not in the negative sense, there can happen that we can reverse this. If we don't believe it can happen, it won't have a prayer of a chance. We can turn it around if we put the work and effort into it. Some people, will still be negative and they say, yeah, but how many times have you seen a revolution that really has turned out? All through the 20th century, so many revolutions and wars to end wars and all that. It never happened. And right now we still have neocons all over the place. They aren't all in one party either. They're in both of the parties, and that's what we have to be challenged. But there have been times in our history in the history of the world, where there has been successes. In 1850, the British passed a law. It was called the Repeal of the Corn Laws. And it was an introduction into free market economics, repealing mercantilism and protectionism, and ushered in the age of the Industrial Revolution. And it was a difficult time. Peel, who was the representative, had this passed. He worked for many, many years, and it was finally passed. And it was smoothly. There were a lot of special interests involved, but it worked. It was smoothly, and they transitioned from mercantilism into a much better system. In 1919, they decided in this country that we were going to take care of the American people to make sure the American people's habits were wise and frugal. And so they passed this prohibition of alcohol. And it was an absurdity. It didn't work. But what happened by the early 1930s? By 1933, the people rose up and said, this is ridiculous. Prohibition is bad. And they repealed prohibition. So someday we're going to wake up and say the same thing about all drugs and right now we're getting a lot more support for this. Repeal these drug laws, get rid of the crime associated with the drug law. In 1933, as Roosevelt took over, he ran believing his program in 1932 was balanced budget. He had the most conservative platform because Hoover wasn't doing such a good job. And he said that he would defend the gold standard and balance the budget and cut spending. Well, that didn't exactly happen because the first thing he did was made it illegal for an American citizen to own gold. I mean, that really told you something about what was happening. But it was illegal to own gold all the way up until 1975. So in 1975, why is gold illegal? And a law was passed, and we moved back in a direction, and the American people could own gold. It's a very important issue. In a free society, don't give up your right to own precious metal, and don't give up your right to own a weapon to defend yourself. But then we even made a little more progress because we had not minted any gold coins since the early 1930s. So in 1985, once again, as a consequence of the Gold Commission, one thing that they came out of that, what we came out with, they would not go along with the views that I had on gold at the time, and they said, well, we'll throw them something, so why don't we go back to minting gold coins again? Far from imperfect, not a gold standard, but it was a big thing. It was a big deal for us to take something minted. It was one of the few constitutional authorities that we have to mint gold and silver coins. So that was restored in 1985. Point being is that it isn't inexorable that we move in the wrong direction. We can start moving in the other direction. And even if you would have asked me 5 years ago that we would get the attention of the nation and we would get the attention of the establishment Republicans, even where they felt compelled to talk about it in the platform, that I never dreamed that we would get attention to probably 75% of the American people say the Fed ought to be audited. So what is our big challenge? The big challenge is can we restore natural rights, God-given rights to our people so that we emphasize the fact that return of liberty can solve so many of our problems. Economic policies means private property, contract rights, gold standard, and get the government out of this business of regulating. The market and property rights regulates quite well. Under those conditions, guess what happens in a free market? They say there'll be no regulations. No, the regulation is if you go bankrupt, you go bankrupt and you don't get bailed out by the government. So the really big question I think that we have to decide upon is which way are we going to go? We see the end of an era. Where is it going to go? And I think the choice is one of two. I do not think that there's going to be another Marxist come along and restore enthusiasm for Marxism. I don't think that tomorrow we're going to have the same thing as a Hitler or Mussolini, but I do think we have to worry about fascism, an expansion of what we already have, which is corporatism. The buddy system between big corporations, big banks, with the government. And that is the reason that we have to be on the side of saying, yes, if you're big and you made your